Hi everyone. Today we're going to take a look at what it means to draw beginning shapes and why it is so important. So we're going to start with drawing spheres, cubes, and volumes. This presentation introduces fundamental concepts in drawing. Basic geometric shapes, squares, circles, cubes, volumes, are building blocks and transition us to three-dimensional forms to understand the concepts of volume. So light and shadow bring your life to work. It is one of the most important parts of how to draw. And here we can see some of those very basic shapes. The presence of light defines the visual world around us. It allows us to perceive shapes, forms, and colors. And so what we're really doing at the end of the day, when we're looking at forms, especially just very simple forms, is we're looking at the light and the shadow of those shapes. And so here's a couple of images to talk about that. How value refers to the lightness and darkness of tones that range from pure white to pure black and all the shades of gray in between. And these can be the very same shapes, but depending on how they're lit, that's how we see what we see. So artists create illusions. They're not really, what we're looking at in an image is just two-dimensional, right? It's just on a piece of paper. But yet, before there was photography, they seemed so realistic because artists started to understand how to translate all of this information about light and dark and shadow, and how to create the illusion of three dimensions on a two-dimensional surface. And so that is so important. Understanding and applying light and value are crucial for achieving any kind of realistic drawing. So how does the light affect the nose? How does the light affect the shape? How does the light affect the railing, the staircase, the whatever? It doesn't matter. Whatever you're drawing, we're not looking necessarily for lines. We're looking for value. So every shadow, midtone, and highlight in our environment is a direct result of the interaction between light and the subject matter. So what is happening? Light source is a direction from which the dominant light originates, right? So its placement affects all light and shadow aspects of the drawing. So let's go through some of these. I'm sorry, it looks like a little bit might be cut off, but that top one is halftone. So highlight is the lightest area on an object where the light directly strikes and reflects the surface of the reflected light. When light hits a surface, so the reflected light then is when light hits a surface, some of it bounces back into the other areas. So if we look at this ball and we look at where the darkest light is, the core shadow, and we look at where the reflected light is, we can see that that's slightly gray, because what happens is the light comes down to the table and bounces back up, and we get a little bit of light in that back area. So then we also have our cast shadow, or our halftone or midtone. So that's a term used. Halftone is often used in printing, but it's also used here in terms of midtones. So that's an area that's between the light and the shadow, right? So that area where it starts to change. It also is referred to as the middle or halfway value range. So like you often hear, like in computer, like Photoshop, you'll hear the term middle gray. That's what that midtone is. It's the middle area. And then you've got the other side of it, which is the darkest darks. Center light, this is the area that forms the most direct illuminated by the light source. It is the light at its brightest part. So that's where, like, if there's going to be a really perfectly white space, that's probably where that's going to be. Cast shadow is where the shadow that the object creates on another surface. So that can change depending. So if a shadow, of a ball on a table, the cast shadow is distinct form of the shape, right? So if the it's the shadow of the object itself. If it's a flat surface, it'll kind of like a ball will appear like an ellipse. But if there's all kinds of stuff on the surface next to it, it'll also cast a shadow onto those, and it'll have different kinds of irregular shapes. So the darkest part of the cast shadow found where the surfaces are closest together. So like right where the ball is on the table, that is where the darkest spot is. The farthest part away from the ball will be where the lightest spot is. And then there's the core shadow, which we talked about a second ago, and that is on the object itself. It's the darkest part of the core, of the shadow. So the light source dictates where all of the shapes are going to be. So if the light source in this case is coming from maybe the upper right, probably upper right, but not all the way to the top of the ball, that's where you're going to, it's going to decide like where all the different parts are. I don't know if you ever have ever gone camping, but we used to sit around when we were kids. We'd go camping and we would have like flashlight and we would tell ghost stories, whatever. But yeah, so if you took the flashlight and you held it under your chin, it made you look really scary because the light is coming from this other space, right? So it's very otherworldly to us because we're so used to being in the sun, and so the light is always above us, so that we have certain shadows that we see every day, and we have those sort of imprinted. They're conventional to us. But then when you change the light source to be underneath us, which is very strange, then we get a whole different feeling, kind of an odd feeling, like wow, something is very otherworldly. All right. So one of the things that you can do is turn all the lights off in a room and take your phone flashlight and literally try to change, the lighting on something and see how much it affects it, and then photograph it. Obviously you need two phones, but yeah, you could try that. Try something like an apple. All right, light logic. So light logic always is that light always travels in a straight line. Shadows respond directly to the light's angle and intensity. Shadow shapes are light hitting a cube creates a cast shadow of a square. Like we said earlier, hitting a sphere would cause an elliptical one. Light intensity, that creates sharp, well-defined edges for a cast shadow. So if it's a really hard light, the shadow's going to be sharper. If it's a soft light, the shadow's going to be more diffuse. It's blurred out, right? It can, like on a cube, you can really see the difference between, the hardest, darkest part of the object where the light is not happening. So soft light creates blurry, less distinct shadows. All right. The longest cast shadow often occurs when the light source is low. So you'll notice here that I kind of tried to create a little diagram. So if the light source is low, you're going to see a much bigger ellipse. If the light source is directly above, you're going to see a different kind of shadow. So this is going to help you kind of think about and understand how these different shadows work. Cast shadows are the darkest. They're right underneath the object. So that, and we said that again, the farther away you go, the lighter the shadow. It's important to understand light behavior, and so, when we look at like tones of light, we're really always looking at a value scale, right? So we have the highlights, the light tone, the mid-tone, the reflected light, the shadow, the core shadow, the cast shadow. And here we can see them in, in individual, like, broken up, but also, if we put them in an actual gradient, we can see how it associates with the shape that we're looking at. So in order to create form, artists have to use value. This is how they create the illusion that something is three-dimensional instead of being flat. This is incredibly important when in drawing class. So what you're always looking at is, the light and the dark, not the lines necessarily, but you can create light and dark with lines. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. But here we can see see how dark it is underneath the ball on the bottom in the reference. See how dark it is right at the very next to the shadow, next to where the ball is. And then see that reflected light underneath. It's almost as light as some of the areas where the ball isn't hidden from the light because it's reflecting back up. So see, and then see the core shadow, that sort of stripe almost in the sphere. Okay. So how do we create shading? Well, there's lots of ways to create shading. We can blend and smudge it, just like we've been looking at in all these illustrations that I've been showing you so far. But we can also do other things. So we can, when we're using pencils, we don't have to necessarily do it all one way. And that's what's really the creative part of drawing. You can make up stuff as you go, and you can use these different techniques. So you can stipple, you can scrumble, you can hatch, you can cross hatch. All of those things will create a difference in how we see the gray. Our eyes make up the difference. We call that closure. Our eyes will create the idea of a circle. Now, here's something very interesting. Remember how I said that drawing is not just about lines? In this particular instance, to be able to show you the different types of line networks, I call these line networks: hatching, scrumbling, stippling, cross-hatching, blending, and so on. I used a circle. See how the circle takes away from the three-dimensionality of the drawing? That black hard line? Yes. So there's areas where the white is, where we shouldn't see any line at all, right? But just for the sake of this, I did that. But it really illustrates how different, a line can really flatten something out. And you don't want to have flat drawings. You want them to look three-dimensional. So hatching are parallel lines used to build up the tone. Cross-hatching are layers of, lines that go in different directions. In this case, kind of to create like a circle. Blending, obviously you're using a blending tool. And so here again, to just look at the breakdown of how it all works. So there's our shadow shape, our cast shadow, our occlusion shadow. So see how dark it is underneath there. Our bouncing light or reflective light. This is a different way to think about it. We have our light source, our core, our center light, our highlight, our halftones, our core shadows. So in conclusion, understanding light and shadow are crucial for creating realistic and impactful drawings. You need to practice them. You need to observe them. The key to doing this is mastering the art of light and value. It's not about just the shape, but the shape is very important, but that's not all it is. You have to experiment. In order to understand how to shade, you've got to try it on paper. You can't keep it in your head. It's like if you want to learn how to play guitar, you can hear the sound, but if you don't pick up the guitar and try it with your fingers, with your hands, and create that hand to brain connection, you're never going to be able to play guitar. You're never going to be able to draw unless you practice. So you need to try different techniques of shading, different techniques of looking at how a light source works, moving the light around. This is a journey. And remind yourself that it's not about perfection, it's about process. Every drawing you do is important, even if it's not perfect in your eyes. To someone else, it might be perfect. And it doesn't really matter. It's about you learning. It's not like you go back and say, oh, I ran slower today, and think of every single step. No, you just know that you still worked on running, and you still worked on your muscles, and you still felt good about it at the end of the day. So it's about an ongoing process of discovery and refinement. And that is what's going to make you a fantastic drawer. So until next time, I will see you.